Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's Mid-City Church Sermon Cast. We're going to look at a story that Jesus tells today that flips the entire rules of religion on their head. And it's actually one of my favorite things about Jesus. And so let's dive in. So one of my favorite things about Jesus is that he often sort of like challenged the religious norms of his day. And I don't want to take that too far. I really do believe that Jesus was the fulfillment of everything that God had been revealing about God's self to the Jewish people. But just there are some times where we just kind of get things wrong, and Jesus comes to straighten those wrong things out. And I think we see that in the story that I'm going to share with you today from Luke chapter 18. So I want to read it to you first, and then we'll unpack it a little together. So this is sometimes known as the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. So here we go. Luke 18, starting with verse 9. So he also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to the heavens, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. So again, with that story, Jesus rewrites the rules of religion. He also tells us how you and I can go home right with God. So one of my favorite Christian writers is a guy named Robert Farrar Capon, and he says that God has been telling us the same message over and over again. It's a message that we struggle to understand. We're also can be pretty forgetful sometimes. So I think even when we get a glimpse of it, it bears repeating. And so God has been trying to tell us this story. God has been trying to reveal this truth to us about God from the very beginning. And it's a message that we hear in the call of Abram. We hear it in the Moses story all the way through the prophets. And of course, we ultimately hear it in the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ. So what is it? What's this message? Paul tells us that the message is a stumbling block. He says it's foolishness. He also reminds us that the wisdom of the world, the way that we understand things, is not the wisdom of God, that God kind of approaches things differently than we do. Jesus says that anyone who has ears to hear should listen, right? So he's kind of calling us in, like, so listen up. So what is it? Well, again, what's this message? So Jesus told this parable to people who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. And that's a really important clue to this message here. Again, those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Now, before we go too much further in unpacking this parable and thinking about this message that God's been giving us, I have to be honest and tell you that there have been times in my life when I fit into this category that Jesus is talking about. There have been times in my life where I've really trusted in myself, in my drive, in my smarts, in my ability to figure things out. And as often goes along with that, right, when you get a little full of yourself, there have also been times when I've kind of looked down on others. So years ago, before my son Ethan was born, so we're talking like about 15 years ago, I decided I needed to get serious about exercising and eating right. I was about to turn 40, and that was like a big number. And I was like, oh, I better start to pay attention to these things. And if there's one thing I've learned about myself, like if I decide I'm going to do something, I'm kind of like I get pretty gung-ho, right? So I started going down the street to a gym a few minutes from my house. I did learn a phrase that I loved during that time from a friend of mine who said, well, you're not out of shape. You're just deconditioned. And so I offer that to you if you ever struggle with this stuff. I'm not actually, I'm deconditioned, but I decided it was time to get conditioned again. So started lifting weights, went 5 days a week, lifted heavy, did cardio. I also started trying to eat right. And my goal was to kind of cut down on my body fat. So I did that whole like 6 meals a day thing, where you eat these small like protein packed meals. I even bought calipers to measure my body fat. My wife Tasha really loved that part because she had to help me to do that. But anyway, so I was really kind of like zeroed in, trying to focus on getting healthier. But at the same time, I have to confess, I also maybe got a little bit full of myself. I became a weight loss expert. I would, give people advice even when they didn't ask for it. I kind of looked down when I went around about people who weren't eating as clean as I was and weren't making fitness a priority. If I could do it, I thought, so could everybody else. So I also experienced something similar in my religious life when I was in my early 20s. So in my early 20s, I was kind of fed up with the world, and I really had decided that I was going to make my religious life my life. But I wasn't interested in church at that point in time, so I found myself drawn to Buddhism. And so some of you know the part of my story where I moved into a Buddhist monastery in New Jersey. But anyway, so I was studying Buddhist philosophy and language. I was meditating daily. I was doing yoga every day. There were even times where I got to hang out with the Dalai Lama, which actually was pretty cool. But when people met me, I think they would think, wow, there's a really spiritual guy. And I kind of didn't mind them thinking of me as a spiritual guy. I kind of saw myself as a spiritual guy. And again, at the same time, I might have looked down my nose at people who weren't as spiritual as I was. So can you relate to any of this stuff? You ever have these times in your life? So Jesus tells this parable about 2 people who go up to the temple to pray. The first one is a Pharisee. He's a religious leader, someone who took the religious laws and the things that he was taught very seriously and expected other people to do the same. Now, one of the things I always want to point out about these Pharisees is they weren't necessarily bad guys, right? They were good people by most people's standards. They would go to church every week. They probably led their Sunday school class. He probably tutored kids in his town. But this guy approaches the altar and he prays something like this: "Dear God, I thank you that I'm not like these other people. I mean, look at them. Did you see what she's wearing over there? And I heard that guy might be cheating on his wife. And that guy in the back pew, that tax collector, man, I really thank you that I'm not like him," right? And we kind of chuckle at it a little bit. I think we should. What kind of a prayer is that? But then Jesus contrasts that man with another person who's sitting in the back pew, a tax collector. Now, we have to understand that where that Pharisee was not a bad guy in his world at the time, the tax collector was. A tax collector was a Jewish person who worked for the Romans, a person who collected money from their own people, kept more than a fair share for themselves. Like these guys, they got rich on this. And then they would send the money that they took from their people to their oppressors, to the people who had conquered them. How do you think people felt about tax collectors? How about this? How about if you found out that somebody had taken money from a children's charity and they used it to go on an all-inclusive Caribbean vacation? Like, how would you feel about that person? That's the way people felt about tax collectors. But when this guy came to the temple in Jesus' story, all he could muster was a one-sentence prayer. He didn't even lift his eyes up, we're told, and he prayed, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." So we have these 2 characters, right? A good church-going guy. Maybe he's a little full of himself, but he's somebody we'd be happy to have in our Sunday school class. And then you've got this guy who's a traitor and a scoundrel. And that's when Jesus delivers kind of the knockout punch of this parable. He tells us of these 2 men, it's the scoundrel who goes home justified or who goes home right with God. And if this doesn't upset our kind of religious sensibilities just a little bit, then we're not quite getting it, right? It's even more shocking when you realize that this is not the first time that Jesus has done this. This is something Jesus does over and over again, making sort of the zero in the story the hero in the story. So right here in the Gospel of Luke, we've seen Jesus with a son who squandered all of his father's money, welcomed home lovingly and to a party. We see a worker who didn't put in a full day's work getting the same amount of money as somebody who worked the whole day. We see a poor man who really did nothing useful with his life at the gates of heaven. And now we see this tax collector, this, again, a scoundrel who Jesus says goes home right with God. So back to our question, what's the message that God is trying to get us, to tell us? So when Ethan was finally born, all of my exercise and diet routines got pretty scrambled up. Sleep became way more important than getting up and going to the gym. And cooking 6 meals a day, I was lucky if I got one good meal during the day, or one kind of nutritious meal. My diet and my exercise regime slipped from my fingers. And interestingly enough, so did my kind of superior attitude about all of it. And the same thing happened in my spiritual life. While living in a monastery was not an easy thing, it certainly was easy to focus on prayer and meditation and study in a monastery. But when I moved out of the monastery and I started going to seminary and I started working in churches, those religious routines that I had set up, they became less routine. But the truth is that these failings, these kind of weaknesses on my part, really in time became the greatest teachers to me. They've helped me find a middle way, kind of a more sane way between trying to be perfect and do everything with my own effort and just doing things that are good and healthy and consistent. They've certainly helped to make me kinder and more forgiving towards other people when they don't get it right. I mean, I don't always get things perfectly, and I mess up, and so do other people. I think most importantly, these failings and the many others in my life have taught me that as good as I can be, I am not the one to rely on for my salvation. And I say it all the time, like if it's up to me, I will figure out a way to mess it up. And so my failings and my faults have taught me the absolute necessity of grace. And that's what we see here in this Jesus story. And I think that's really the message that God has been trying to give us over and over and over again. It's grace. So we talk about grace in the Christian life a lot. What is it? So grace is unearned and unmerited favor. Grace is getting what you don't deserve, or it's not getting what you do deserve. I think about grace in kind of a practical sense. Grace is a world that provides me with everything I need, with the sun and the air and the water and the food that I need to sustain life, right? And I didn't do anything to earn any of these things. We live in a grace-filled world. Grace is my wife and my children loving me when I'm not at my absolute best. And to be fair, grace is me loving them when they're not at theirs. Now, grace does not mean no rules, no boundaries, no truth. It means we give up this idea that somehow payback is what's going to heal the human heart or mend the world. Now, of course, for us as Christians, the greatest of all the graces is the grace of God, a God who loves us and saves us when we did nothing to earn or to deserve loving or saving. So I love a story that Brennan Manning shares about a time that he was serving in the Korean War. Y'all know who Brennan Manning is? He wrote a really fantastic book called The Ragamuffin Gospel. It's a book I would highly recommend if you're a reading person. But anyway, so Brennan Manning was in the Korean War with a childhood friend whose name was Ray Brennan. And one night during combat, a grenade was lobbed over towards Ray and Brennan and some other guys. And without hesitation, Ray threw himself on top of that grenade, and he was killed instantly. And it saved Brennan Manning's life. So years later, Brennan Manning was at his friend Ray's mother's house. He was kind of touching base with her, checking in. And as they talked, he asked her this question: "Do you think Ray loved me?" Now, I want you to think about it. If you were his mother, if you were Ray's mother, what would you answer to that question? So Brennan Manning says that she stood up, she walked over to him, she looked him straight in the eye, and she said, "Jesus Christ, what more could he have done for you?" And he said in that moment, it really hit him, and it became sort of a defining spiritual moment for him. He said it was the moment when grace stopped being abstract and started becoming personal and embodied. So later on, when Brennan Manning became a Franciscan priest, he took his friend's name. Brennan Manning's name originally was Richard Manning, and he took his friend's name Brennan as his own first name, as a way of kind of remembering that that his friend had saved him and that he was given a new life and a new name by his friend's act of love and grace. So the connection for us as Christians, I hope is pretty obvious, because we believe that grace became personal and embodied in Jesus Christ. In Jesus, we believe that God's love took on flesh, that Jesus came and taught us, and he healed the sick. He welcomed sinners, he fed the hungry, and he prayed for his enemies. On the cross, we believe that God's love and grace absorbed the worst that we had to throw at God, all of our failings, all of our faults, our darkest places, and that Jesus took all those things and he returned them to us as love and mercy. What more could God have done for us to show us the depth of his love? So listen, when we receive that grace in our lives, when we begin to live with this Jesus-shaped grace, it changes us from the inside out. It humbles our pride a little bit. It doesn't mean we don't try to do things in the world and try to succeed and try to do our best, but we're humble when we do that. It softens our judgment against others, because we realize that as much as we're in need of grace, other people are in need of grace too. And it helps us to discover love and joy and peace and patience, all the fruit of the Spirit that Paul writes about. This grace also changes how we relate to the world. See, grace is not just something we receive, it's something we live into the world. Not looking down on others, but forgiving them, caring for the hurting, feeding the hungry, inviting others to the grace-filled life that we have found in Jesus. So the Pharisee in Jesus' story thought that he had it all together, but he was wrong, and Jesus tells us he missed it. The tax collector, on the other hand, as broken as he was, opened himself up to God's grace and mercy. And Jesus tells us that he went away from that place and that time right with God. One trusted in himself, the other trusted in God. So what I kind of want to ask you to think about is this: where are you in this story right now? Like, which character do you relate to more? Are you winning? You feel like everything's going great and you're on top of the world? I guess what I would want to say to you is be careful, right? Because when we get really sort of full of ourselves, there's not a whole lot of room for God and for God's grace. Can you think of something in your life that maybe you do need help with? Could you pray about it? Could you talk to somebody about it? Could you follow Jesus and follow his way of grace? Or maybe you're on the other side of things. Maybe you feel like you're more like the Pharisee, that you're failing right now, that you're messing up, that you're off course. One thing I want you to know is your place with God has nothing to do with your successes or your failures. You really are loved and valued just as you are. The whole Jesus story is that God comes to us and God loves us in our weakest moments and in our brokenness. And actually, it's in our weakest moments that God does God's best work. So again, I want to encourage you. Where do you need to do? Can you pray about these things? Can you talk to someone? Turn to Jesus and his grace. So there we have it. The rules of religion rewritten and the secret to going home right with God. It really is the same story that God has been trying to tell us from the very beginning. It's just that in Jesus, God makes it as clear as it can be. It is not our strength, it is not our goodness that saves us. It is the love and the grace and the power of God revealed in Jesus that does. It's Jesus and His grace that saves us. His radical, patient, steady, unstoppable, turn the world upside down grace. That's the message. And the only question really left for us is this: will we have it? Will we accept the grace of Jesus in our lives? Catch you next time, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Mid-City Church Sermoncast. If you'd like to find a home sheet, a resource that accompanies the sermoncast that has more questions to explore, the scriptures we use today, and more information, you can visit our website, midcity.church/sermoncast. If you'd like to support Mid-City Church by giving, please text the word GIVE to 225-307-0662. Thank you for your generosity, and we look forward to seeing you next week.